Dr. Trivedi, do you think that most people with ADD or ADHD have a restricted airway?
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of simple if you think about it. ADD, ADHD are neurodivergent disorders. Somewhere in development, early between 0 to maybe 12, if you're not getting the adequate amount of oxygen, your neurological system's not going to develop to its ideal. Most of these people, when you look at a restricted airway, what is that? A reduction in oxygen. So when patients come to me and they tell me they have ADD, first thing I do is look at the airway, and 9 out of 10 times it's restricted.
So this guy is a dentist, and he doesn't know what he's talking about beyond that, apparently. He is taking science, looking at correlations between respiratory issues and ADHD, and he doesn't, clearly, in my opinion, doesn't know how to interpret this data, looking, I think, just for an excuse to sell whatever it is he's selling. Now, there is a pretty mild correlation, just a correlation between restrictive airway disease, like asthma, for example, and ADHD. But it's not, that significant. The most recent study that I looked at, which looked at a large cohort of people to try to nail down this number. Different studies show different things, but the large study that I saw recently showed that the correlation is maybe 1.17, versus 1, just a slight excess of ADHD among people with asthma and a slight excess of asthma among people with ADHD. That was, again, specifically looking at asthma. But there are studies which do show that there may be a correlation between the kind of restrictive airway disease that can lower your oxygen and ADHD. But the thing is, we don't know what the cause is, right? These are correlational studies only. You cannot assume cause and effect or any specific cause and effect. It's possible, and it is currently being researched, that there's a genetic linkage because both asthma and ADHD are genetic, right? ADHD is mostly a genetic disorder. Then, so if any two genetic things are correlated, it's possible that there's some genetic linkage going on, right? That the genes are close to each other, therefore they tend to sort with each other, and therefore there'll be a higher rate. It's also possible that that's not the case, so that hasn't been proven or disproven yet, but that's definitely a plausible hypothesis. But it's also possible that if you have asthma, for example, if you have respiratory disease, that may exacerbate the symptoms of ADHD, therefore making it more likely to be diagnosed. It's not causing the ADHD, it's just making it present more. Again, that would explain this sort of mild correlation between the two things. But there is no evidence to show that restrictive airway disease causes ADHD. It is a significant cause of ADHD, or that 9 out of 10 people with ADHD have restrictive airway disease. That's just nonsense. That is not what the data shows at all. And even if there is this moderate correlation there, we don't know what the causation is. That is still being researched. And it's not obvious. It's not simple when you think about it. ADHD is actually a fairly complicated disorder. Complicated genetically and neurologically, et cetera. It's not simple to think, it's low oxygen, therefore you have low oxygen, you're going to have ADHD. Of course, low oxygen gets blamed on a lot of things. Why it causes one thing versus something else in different people is never explained. Also, it's important to realize that if your lungs are healthy, you're going to get enough oxygen in there. Oxygen doesn't require you to move a lot of air. We breathe mainly to blow off CO2. You just need to have air in your lungs and it will exchange oxygen quite well. So you have to have a pretty significant level of airway restriction before you start to actually lower your oxygen tension, the amount of oxygen getting into your blood, as opposed to just being able to blow off enough CO2. So we're not talking about just somebody who has airway restriction and doesn't know it. They just have a slight deviated septum or something. That's not going to cause ADHD. So this guy's basically talking out his ass. He doesn't know what he's talking about in terms of the neuroscience or the medical aspects of this. And no, restrictive airways is not a major cause of ADHD.